Yeah. Welcome to the latest episode of Full Throttle here on Unprecedented TV. This is where we slam the pedal to the metal on the issues of the scorching Britain. Tax grabs, a fiscal black hole that's bankrupting the nation, unchecked immigration overwhelming our communities, and the totalitarian grip silencing free speech and common sense. I'm Paul Naylor, Communications Director for the Alliance of British Drivers. And today we're diving deep into the fight against the net zero agenda and the myths that keep the country locked in the slow lane.
And I'm Gregory, Policy Director of the Alliance of British Drivers. We're thrilled to welcome back two heavy hitters, McBride OBE, economist and tireless advocate for affordable, reliable power, and returning guest David Turver, the sharp-eyed climate skeptic who's been cutting through the establishment noise for years. Together, they're co-authoring a new paper that pulls no punches on the real costs and flaws of net zero. From economic carnage to the physics that exposes the scam, buckle up. This is Full Throttle.
So welcome, Catherine McBride and David Turver. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Hi there. So
Hi, thanks for having us.
That's great to see you both again.
Yes, absolutely.
So what has sparked this joint paper and why now? Is net zero's damage too big to ignore?
It's something that I've been thinking about for about 6 months, and getting a think tank to sponsor it has been quite an effort, but we eventually got there just in time for Christmas, so most people didn't have time to work on it. But I've been collecting data for this for months and months and months, because it's become more and more obvious in the economics that the real problem is net zero. And I'm a Brexiteer, and people keep telling me that trade is down because of Brexit, or, the economy's down because of Brexit. And when I looked into it, all of the drops in trade are in things that are affected by net zero. Our exports of oil and gas themselves are down. Our exports of chemicals are down. In our car exports, which is one of our biggest exports, the export of ICE petrol and diesel cars has dropped dramatically. And though we are now selling hybrids and EVs, they're not enough to make up for the drop in petrol and diesel cars. So we've lost since 2017 was the high point. And since then, we've lost, I think it's 15% of our sales, the value of our sales. And that's really just through the swapping from an ICE car to an EV, which we don't really make. We don't have the batteries and things like that. So it's affecting us in all sorts of ways that politicians don't seem to understand. And the easy answer was always blame Brexit. And when you go, no, this is not Brexit. There are companies closing all over the country. And the high energy costs we've got and the very strict environmental regulations we've got started in the EU. Well, in fact, they go all the way back to the Climate Change Act in 2008. In fact, in the front of the paper, I put a little history of how we got here. And I thought, I'll just do it as bullet points because it'll just be short and quick. And then I found more and more bullet points. It goes on for pages. I know the editor didn't cut all that, but it's fascinating how it was 1,000 cuts of this regulation, this tax, that tax, all one after the other, and no one ever added them up and went, "Ooh, that looks expensive,"
And how did the two of you start working together? Did David? Did you contact Catherine, or vice versa? What happened?
Vice versa. So we've been sort of like following each other on Twitter X for some time, and we end up going to some of the same sort of like presentations and things. And one of them, she sort of grabbed my elbow and said, "I'm doing this paper. Do you want to help?" And that was it, really.
Brilliant.
So is there one particular net zero myth that the paper destroys, or does it just destroy them all?
I think the unfortunate myth is that a lot of people think that they can just reverse net zero in a nanosecond. Oh, we'll just, say it's null and void. And when you look at how finely it's intertwined into so much regulation, you realize that that's going to be quite complicated. And it's something that will also become a bit structural. You'll have a lot of vested interests and people who've now gone to the trouble of upgrading their plant and machinery to comply with net zero will resist not having to do that anymore. Yet, as Brian knows, they are presently having to compete with Chinese imports that don't have to comply with that. And though we're talking about joining the EU's ETS scheme, just because we want to push our prices up even more, and joining their CBAM scheme, their CBAM only counts the carbon emissions. It doesn't count all of the other things that companies have to comply with. The allowances that they have to buy for their waste emissions and the allowances that they have to buy for the actual processing and stuff like that. It's just a small part of it, and it's enough for the EU to give itself a bit of a gold star. But for the UK, those industries have already left town. So to then start putting taxes on imports, it's a bit like, well, we import that stuff because we need it. We need the aluminium to make cars with and planes, which are much more valuable. But you're going to put all this tax on aluminium, having driven our own aluminium smelters out of business years ago. So how does that make sense? It might have made sense if when they started taxing our own companies, they also taxed imports. But they didn't do it then, when I would have stood up with them and said, yeah, that makes sense. But instead they're doing it now when it's too late, far too late.
David, your thoughts?
Well, just to echo what Catherine's saying, I did a bit of a deep dive on the various legislations and so on. And I mean, it is literally thousands of words when you go through it, starting, I think, in 1986 with some tax thing on gas. But then then they build on each other and they cross-refer each other and so on. So it is really a sort of like a legal Gordian knot. And then there's sort of like crossover onto, for instance, the TCA with Europe, where we're not allowed to backslide on it and stay and remain in the TCA. So it is going to be a devil of a job to unwind it. And I suspect, rather like apocryphally, the Gordian knot was sort of like some people try to unravel it, but I think it was it William the Conqueror? Was it? I can't remember who it was.
Cut it. Was it Perseus or somebody like that? I'm getting mixed up. He was with the minutes
with my mythology and stuff. But, I think we're probably going to need our version of a great big beautiful repeal bill just to get rid of all these things.
Yeah. Well, I think we should maybe start with the European Communities Act of 1972 and then follow it up with the Climate Change Act of 2008. Take those out, the whole lot just collapses. Existence, repeal them.
Yes, I mean, I think that'll be a good start, but there's other stuff that needs to go on too, and there might be some tactics around, because I think you need to introduce primary legislation to repeal the act. There might be tactics around being able to, say, rely on the paper that they just produced in the US that essentially revisited all the climate science and basically said, well, yes, climate change is a bit of a problem, but it's not an existential threat.
Yeah.
And there are clauses within the Climate Change Act that say, well, if the science changes, then you can sort of like resile from some of these targets. And also if the basis on which the decisions were made to create the carbon budgets from the Climate Change Act were false. And I think that's demonstrable, certainly from carbon budget 6 and 7, where they've come up with absolutely ridiculous numbers for the cost of renewables, like a third of what we're paying. I think it's pretty easy to argue that the basis on which the decisions were taken was therefore wrong, and therefore we can change the carbon budget. And that might be a good first step. And then, as you say, I think these things need to be repealed. The Climate Change Committee needs to be disbanded. And I think there's wholesale decapitation of the leadership of NESO, the National Energy Operator.
We need the actual
more decapitation. We need
the bonfire of the Quangos that Cameron promised and never delivered.
So David, you're going to be out there with the guillotine, are you?
It's a metaphorical decapitation of the management rather than necessarily the people.
Though I must say, some of their decisions are pretty incredible. Because when we were part of the EU, we signed up to the Paris Agreement, and the EU decided it would drop collectively amongst all the countries, which is their way they get around things, because some countries drop more than others. They dropped their emissions by 55%. And for some reason, when we came out of the EU, our Climate Change Committee advised the then Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the Energy Secretary, who was also the Energy, Business and Investment Strategy Minister, when you put those together. And they decided in their wisdom that the UK could drop cut its emissions by 68% by 2030. And you're going, wait a minute, 55 was high. Within the EU, I think we would have got away with about 40, because some of the Eastern Bloc countries would have been able to move into the 21st century and cut quite a lot. But for us to suddenly have to do 68 was sort of insane. And this was to impress their friends at the COP26 or something like that.
When Boris was going to turn us into the Saudi Arabia of wind or something, wasn't it?
So we'd have to follow the US. We'd have to leave the Paris Agreement, and we'd have to also get out of our financial services regulation is full of rubbish about what they call sustainability, and they actually define it as sustainability in the environment rather than financial sustainability, which a lot of people in the city assume that's what it means because they never bothered to look up the definition. So that this is all the way through financial regulation. It's also now in all of our Ofcom, Ofgem, off whatever they're called. All of the regulators, regardless of what they're regulating, have to consider the environment and climate change in their decisions. It's through all of our regulation. It's really ridiculous how much this is being put.
On companies, they've got to do all the climate reporting. And just on Ofgem, I mean, Ofgem was set up to be the consumer champion, but now essentially its primary objective is to deliver net zero, which is almost like working in completely the opposite direction. But they've still got the aura of being a consumer champion, whereas in fact they're doing the opposite. And those things have just got to change a lot, I think.
So, in all this work, did you sort of come up with what figure net zero is going to cost the average family over its 25-year or whatever it is, between now and 2050, 24 years, whatever?
I haven't looked into that because the paper's not really about the average family. I'm really interested in the average business.
Right, okay,
This whole paper is really, is being written for the Great British Business Council. And it's really how our regulations are driving businesses out of the UK, and often out of business completely.
We've had that discussion because I can testify to it actually happening because my own long-term ex-employer has just turned turtle and had in effect been dismembered by the Chinese.
And in the long run, that will hurt the British population more than anything.
Yeah, very much so.
If they get their domestic gas, if they don't have jobs, they can't pay their domestic gas bill.
Exactly. Yeah. But that is being reflected all over the UK, and of course in Scotland, all these refineries closing down, and of course once the refinery closes down, all the downstream products from that refiner are affected, and then we end up importing those products to do the transformation here in the UK, which is more expensive. It really is nonsense on stilts.
And we're importing those products from a country whose Paris climate commitment was to continue increasing its CO2 emissions until at least 2030.
Yeah.
I'll be surprised if they stop then. And India didn't put a limit on its. It signed up to the agreement, but also didn't put a limit on it, because people don't realize the Paris Agreement. Every country got to choose their own limit, and so a lot of countries went, well, we're choosing zero.
Because our emissions are ramping up at 10% per annum or whatever.
Yeah. Well, exactly. That was, we're still developing nations. We've still got, even though we've got a space program, we're a developing nation. So therefore, we're going to just keep pumping this out.
Yeah.
In fact, I did calculate the difference between our production emissions and our consumption emissions. Yeah. And our consumption, we're bringing in about 200 million tons of carbon each year just on our imports.
Yeah.
So the idea that we've cut our emissions by 300 million is like, well, yes, you have. But cutting your emissions in your left hand by 300 and then importing 200 from China is not really the cut you think it is,
No.
Yeah, you can spin a story any way you like to make it look better than it actually is, but you're right. The truth will out.
Exactly.
It's actually, we're playing an accounting game.
Yeah.
It's like playing Scrabble with someone who knows all of those weird words with 2 letters that you've never heard of. And so they're just playing the game of, so gas from Norway is not our emission, that's their emission. So that's building up Norway's emissions, but it's lowering the UK's because we're not using our gas, we're using their gas.
Yeah.
And there are things like that which make no sense and make no difference to global climate change if you believed in global climate change, which I'm not sure I do.
No.
But it's so this really ridiculous way of trying to apportion emissions to a land area makes no sense because the air blows around, it goes all over the place.
Yeah, it doesn't funnel upwards. It goes everywhere.
But I mean, for me, as an Oxford-educated chemistry, ex-chemistry, I mean, it's quite a long time ago, but even if you take away all the man-made emissions of carbon dioxide, they only represent 3.5% of the total. The other 96.5% are produced by natural processes over which we have no control. So it's like trying to change the direction of a rampaging tiger by tweaking its tail fur. It won't make any difference. No. So we are pauperizing ourselves for an objective that's not achievable. It is insanity. There's no other way to describe it.
Yeah. No, it is. It's a type of insanity.
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest producers of CO2 in recent times was when the volcanoes in Iceland erupted a few years back, and pumped all that into the air. And now we're being expected as human beings to mitigate that. But it's nonsense.
But the biggest eruption we've had recently was the subaquatic one, and it pumped a huge amount of water vapor, which is the primary global warming gas, primarily large percentage global warming gas, and it's also a highly effective global warming gas, more so than carbon dioxide. And that caused a spike in temperatures that has taken 2 to 3 years to start coming down, and I can show it. I'll show you, if you can put that graph up that I sent you, please, Charlotte.
Yeah, that's the Rarotonga one in the middle.
Yeah, Rarotonga, Yeah, and these are satellite measurements taken by the UH satellite, as you can see, and it's a self-calibrating satellite, and the data feeds into two ex-NASA scientists. One is Professor John Christie from the University of Huntsville in Alabama, and the other is Dr. Roy Spencer. And what it does is it follows the month by month. You can see those are the little blue dots, and then the red line is the sort of 13-month centered average. So 6 months before, 6 months after, and the month in the middle, which is why it doesn't go to the end, because obviously there isn't 6 months of readings. It can't actually put them in. But the point is that Hunga Tonga happened just around where the R is of January, and you can see that the result was a massive, well, it's not a massive spike actually, because when you look at the scale here, you're only talking about 2 degrees.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and this is, people are sort of losing sleep over 2 degrees. But if you think about it, the temperature in the UK can be anywhere between, in a typical summer, 30 degrees to a typical winter -6 or so. So 2 degrees is neither here nor there. You know, if we didn't have all these sophisticated instruments, we wouldn't even know that anything really had happened. But certainly that massive plume of stratospheric water vapor is now declining, and the temperature is starting to drop back down again. And currently, it's at about 0.35 degrees above the 20-year average between 1979 and no, it's 19. Yeah, I think it's 79. It's a 30-year, 79 and 2009. But no, it rolls forward. Actually, they roll it forward. So it'll be from the middle, actually, from 81 through to 23 or something like that. So yes, there's been some warming. Nobody's disputing that there's been some warming, but it certainly doesn't represent any kind of existential threat. And the other thing is that there's been massive greening of the world. You know, places except for the Sahara, where it would be difficult to get much extra growth. But outside of that, there's been a massive increase in greening, massive increase in crop yields, even without adding extra fertilizer, and that's an advantage, because the more crops there are, the more plants there are, life thrives. So we're being fed a very bad line in arguments that 2 or 3 degrees is going to make any real difference to civilization. It won't. Civilization will thrive as it did in history in all periods when the temperature rose. Whenever the temperature falls, that's when we have problems. Black Death and all these other things have always happened when the temperature's actually fallen, not when it was rising. Well, empires tend to rise when the temperature rises and fall when it declines. Anyway, sorry, that was a bit of a diversion, but you can see that there is significant variation from month to month. We have had a spike. We know what caused the spike, and it's on the decline now. So the big worry is, well, what's going forward, and some of all of the measurements all of the data that are used by politicians rely on climate models. And the climate models don't reflect what we're looking at here. The climate models are going like upwards like that, and the average temperatures are going like that. So it's about 1.5 degrees a century, maybe. Well, that's manageable. You might, if there's any increase in sea level rise, but there's not much evidence that there is significant. The Dutch, have coped with having a country that's underwater for decades, and they just keep managing it. So adaptation is a sensible approach, not it's evolution, not revolution, which is what we're being fed with. Anyway, sorry, that was just a bit of an aside. So where were we?
Well, I'd add to that though I agree with the temperature records and stuff. Unfortunately, our regulatory environment around net zero, I don't think the people who thought it up even are interested in temperature changes.
No.
It shocks me that it's just another form of revenue raising.
Yeah.
In most,
Yes.
It just gives them a huge amount of control and a large amount of income. And I don't think they even watch the I'm sure they've never seen that chart. And if they did see it, they wouldn't blink. They certainly wouldn't change any of their rules. because they've just got this blind idea that no, we must push this agenda because that's the trendy thing to do. That's what people at the World Economic Forum tell us to do. And it raises income, makes all these companies pay us. And that's the stupid thing, that the companies have accepted this, because the money they give to the government in their reparations for CO2 emissions doesn't go to lowering CO2 emissions or saving the planet or, anything like that. Just goes straight into HMRC's big black hole that they keep telling us about. And it's like, well, how does paying a tax to the government stop net zero? And no one's ever, they claim, oh, well, it makes things more expensive and therefore people don't buy them, and therefore
but that's an economic death spiral.
Well, exactly. That's what we've worked out. That what actually happens is it's not that people then go out of business, and then they don't have employment, and then you don't have big revenue like income tax revenue that was a lot more than the silly carbon tax revenue.
Yeah. Well, talking about money, and I'll put this to both of you. So, David first. Politicians keep saying that renewables are cheap. What's the biggest lie in their cost numbers?
Well, I do a lot of work on this, and I mean, it is basically just a straight up lie. So if you look at the older renewables, particularly offshore wind, I mean, some of those are priced at sort of like over £200 per megawatt hour at the moment, and haven't looked for a few weeks, but a typical wholesale price is about 80, so they're like 2.5 times more. It's true that the ones that have been awarded more recently, so the offshore wind that was awarded a few weeks ago back in January, that's at something like £94 per megawatt hour in today's money, I think, which is still more than the 80. But what they always omit to mention is what the extra cost of renewables are. So we have to have grid balancing, we have to have backup from the capacity market, and of course they're spending tens of billions on expanding the grid to connect all these remote wind farms from where they are, so 100 miles offshore, to the source of demand. And I did a sort of like a fag packet calculation there. So if you add up all of those costs and then attribute them to the intermittent renewables of wind and solar, that adds about £33 per megawatt hour to their sort of like nominal cost on the contract for difference. And therefore they're then much more expensive than gas. And that price of gas includes a carbon tax too. So I haven't looked at what it was in January, but in December, the carbon tax was about 37% of the wholesale price of gas-fired electricity. So, gas-fired electricity could be down at 50 or 55 or something. And more modern plants, with higher efficiencies, could be even cheaper. Even with our elevated gas price, that we're sort of essentially constraining our own supply of gas because we're not allowing drilling in the North Sea and we're not allowing fracking. And our gas, UK and European gas is, typically about 3 times more expensive than US gas. So there's a huge scope for cutting the costs of of energy in general and electricity specifically, if we stop hamstringing ourselves and go for maximum supply. Which means we have to lift the bands of drilling, and then gas-fired electricity might drop to 25 or 30 pounds per megawatt hour or something, and then if you don't have the carbon tax on top, retail prices, and you get rid of all the subsidies, so the wholesale, we pay sort of like 27-28p per kilowatt hour in our bills, of which about 8p is the wholesale price, and the rest of it is the subsidies that I mentioned, the contract for difference, renewable obligations, feed-in tariffs,
containment costs as well.
Pardon?
I don't understand how we can actually give a renewable producer money to not generate. That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Well, yes, that's in the balancing cost. That's called curtailment. So yes, there's that as well, and then there's the extra distribution and transmission costs, and then Of course, suppliers need to make a profit and so on.
Yeah.
So, but if we really decide to take the axe to this stuff, I don't know. I think prices could fall by nearly 2/3 if we take all this stuff out. But that takes, it'll take a gargantuan political will, but it could be done. And we can see it can be done because, the government publishes the figures from the IEA, and our electricity prices are like 4 times those in the US, industrial electricity prices.
Yes.
We've got the highest industrial electricity prices in, essentially in the developed world, and pretty close to that on domestic electricity prices too. And that is just killing the economy.
Yes.
Everything we do needs energy.
Yes.
Whether it's a fish and chip shop or a pub, as well as chemical plants and the ceramics industry or aluminium smelting or whatever. And of course, if you've got high energy prices that are far higher than your industrial competitors, and that's a big portion of your cost, then of course those things are going to go elsewhere. And the smaller businesses, they're either going to go bust, or we see it, or we have to pay the price in our our weekly food shop or whatever.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing I don't understand with all of this with renewables is that they're not stable, they're not dispatchable, they're not reliable, they're reliably unreliable, and yet we're putting more of that generating capacity into our grid. So we're forcing ourselves into Iberian blackout territory.
Yeah.
Yes, we are. And I did a paper for the GWPF that was published last week, and I looked at our dispatchable power. And if you make, typically speaking, a gas-fired power plant is sort of like designed to run for 25 or 30 years. And, if you treat it nicely, you might get it to run a bit, and maintain it well, you might be able to get it a bit longer. So from their database, I sort of assumed, well, look, if we can get these out to sort of like 35 years, which is a bit of a struggle, particularly when they're running so intermittently to essentially produce when the renewables aren't producing. So that's a bit of a stretch. If you start, from now onwards, what you might call our firm power capacity, particularly with the nuclear power, the older nuclear power plants starting to roll off, then over the next couple of years, our firm power capacity starts to fall off a cliff. And that is very, very dangerous. And we saw that, this time last year, I think it was in the middle of January last year, we came very, very close to a near miss. Catherine Porter wrote extensively about it. I wrote a bit about it. We had something like, from memory, sort of like 400 or 500 megawatts of headroom. And we only saved ourselves because we got them to turn back on one of the interconnectors that was down for maintenance. And, if we hadn't done that, we would have been, we would likely have been in, an Iberian blackout scenario. Now, of course, that Iberian blackout happened, essentially in the spring in Spain when it's quite warm. But if we have that in the winter here when it's -6 outside, people will die.
Yes.
I used to work for a company that built retirement apartments for the elderly, and we didn't allow gas in those things because we thought that was a safety hazard, because they might leave the gas on and then suffocate themselves. So everything was electric. But if everything's electric and the power goes off, then you're hosed. You're screwed.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if you're elderly, then that's particularly difficult.
Well, one of the questions that's further down, our agenda's a bit fuzzy now, but it doesn't matter. So if net zero is wrong, what's the realistic path to cheap, reliable power for homes and industry? I mean, I think I know, but I think you'd probably tell me what I believe to be the case.
That's a difficult one. In an island with huge quantities of coal and another 50 years of gas and goodness knows how much oil, what could we do? Where could we get that power? I just can't work out where that thing could come from. I mean, it's so obvious. It just drives me crazy that they want to build nuclear power, except that's going to take 10 years, and then they want to do all this other stuff, and you're going, no, just use the gas. We lowered our emissions we halved our emissions from coal-fired electricity by producing gas-fired electricity.
Yeah.
And that was a good thing. Why not just leave it at that? Just stop there.
Yeah.
The trouble with quangos is once you invent them, they're always looking for new things to do. So instead of just going,
targets, and the targets are always smaller. Nobody says, "Oh, I think we've done enough now. We can stop. This is okay."
Yes.
Always, so we say, "Oh no, we need to do more. We need to do more."
Yeah. Yes,
which is why our economy's crashing.
That is an interesting thing, actually. I'm in the middle of writing something else, and a little known fact is that our per capita emissions of CO2 are now about half of those of China.
Yes.
And we're actually below the world average.
Yeah. Doesn't surprise me.
And yet, we're still supposed to be wearing this sort of sackcloth and ashes and sort of like atoning for past sins, where we're doing more than the rest of the world. We have done more than the rest of the world. And there's an interesting correlation between reduction in emissions, which actually means reduction in energy consumption. So our per
which means a
capita
reduction in living standards
and reduction in per capita GDP. So our World in Data have got this great chart where they plot one against the other, and we're down in the bottom left, where we've shrunk our emissions and shrunk our energy use, and our economy is basically stagnating on a per capita basis. And then you look at China and India and the rest of the world, and they're up in the top right, where they're growing their energy use and growing their economies.
And growing their energy use per capita as well.
But then we have a politician class who keep telling us the only problem is Brexit, and we have to rejoin the EU because our growth is so low. And when you say no, that's not the problem, because this is happening in the EU as well. Both areas have this declining production, declining industry, declining GDP, and it's all because they adopted this rather stupid net zero, and the UK's done it in spades. They've done it more than anyone else. And rather peculiarly, in going through the paper and looking at various trade agreements, we've agreed that we won't lower our standards in the EU's trade agreement and also in the New Zealand's trade agreement. But we're much more likely to meet our targets than either of those areas are. So they've enforced us that if we were to drop out of the Paris Agreement, this trade agreement with New Zealand is null and void. And you're sort of going, well, yes, but you're nowhere near meeting your commitment. So why should we bother, But there is an insanity in this whole thing.
Absolutely. And so you produced some work quite a while ago where you looked at the industries that were profitable, like oil and gas, and the non-profit sector ones, which often were sort of public sector ones where your productivity is very low and incomes are low. And we're investing in all the stuff which is making our economy bottom heavy, instead of investing in the stuff in the top left-hand corner, which is high energy production, high productivity, and high profits, which then that makes more profit for the exchequer to distribute.
Yeah.
There's an updated version of that chart in the paper that we're doing.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why I knew he'd be the guy for this job, But the lowering emissions per capita is ridiculous.
Yes.
And especially as I think though our World in Data does have our import emissions, I don't think they've included it in that chart.
No.
And that's the dumb thing, is we're just importing those emissions that we're not producing ourselves. And then giving ourselves a gold star for doing that,
Exercise in self-delusion.
It is.
Yeah, because also it's not just their emissions; they have much lower environmental standards.
Yes.
Yeah. It's we've put incredible constraints on our companies, especially our chemical companies. And they have none of the same. And it gets worse. I was looking into titanium dioxide. In fact, I just did a short Substack about this.
Yeah.
Mainly because of our conversation before, but I also discovered that the EU has now banned it as use in a food as a food additive, which is being used as a food additive since the 1950s.
Yeah, it has.
And they didn't have any scientific evidence. They did it on the precautionary principle.
Yeah.
But the EU's medical agency, the EMA, they didn't ban it for use in pills and pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't find any scientific evidence to ban it. And the UK's food standards have also decided not to ban it because they couldn't find any scientific evidence either.
They tried very hard, if I can interrupt a second, Captain. What they did was they tried to classify it as a potential carcinogen, and the test that they did, they put a lot of rodents in like cages, well, boxes really, because it was enclosed on all sides, transparent ones, and they put something like, I think it was about 300 grams per cubic meter of titanium dioxide in. Well, that's a whiteout. You just cannot see at that level of TiO2, and you would be breathing this dust in, and it would compromise lung function at those levels. And of course, some of the rats developed stress-induced tumours. So that was how they came up with the argument that it was a potential carcinogen. Well, it would be if you went around and everywhere was 300 grams per cubic meter of titanium dioxide. But essentially, it's an inert powder. You can swallow it; it'll go straight through it, come out the other end. Won't do you any harm. It's very inert. But if you choose the right conditions, you can make it. I mean, if it had been flour or virtually anything, at those levels in your lungs would have been really, really problematic. So the evidence was very, very flaky. You think that instead of looking at things from a rational perspective, they're looking for excuses to ban things rather than reasons not to. It's a very the precautionary principle is sort of a bit like, let's not go out of the cave today because a saber tooth might eat us or whatever. It's like instead of you've got to take a balanced approach to risk. You analyze it and then you manage it. But they seem to think you can eliminate risk, which is a stupid approach.
That's true. Well, that's unfortunately in a lot of our government at the moment. They're trying to eliminate risk. A lot of our financial services are trying to eliminate risk. But as I've had a flu for the last few days, and I've been living on paracetamol, which probably also uses it to keep his little pills white. And they're allowed to use it.
Yeah.
And that's the bizarre thing. It's like, well, if it's so dangerous, you wouldn't put it in pills for sick people. And yet they do. So it's not dangerous. And I think if it was carcinogenic, we might have noticed by now, 50 years after using it.
Particularly bearing in mind there was like over 80 years experience of the workers on titanium dioxide plants, and there was no evidence of any additional risk for cancer or any other. In fact, in many cases, the workers on the plants had better average life expectancy than people who didn't work on the plants, because they weren't allowed to smoke when they were working on the plants, of course, so cigarette consumption was down.
Well, apparently they use it in sunscreen so maybe it was blocking, ultraviolet rays.
Well, there were several grades used for that, some of which are very white, and the very small particle size ones were pretty transparent, although they tend to give you a look of sort of a bit pasty. It does still has some effect. But they're very efficient in sunscreens, but again, they're going after them, on the eliminate risk basis, because there is still some risk if you go out in the sun anyway, with or without sunscreen.
I think the users of the precautionary principle are just trying to create jobs for themselves. I was very pleased to see that the UK didn't follow, but unfortunately, under the EU reset, we'll be following them. So our food manufacturers, if they use it, they're going to have to change the form, which is will be costly and expensive, time-consuming for companies to invent a new way to make something, change the formula, test market it, make sure it tastes the same, and that their regular customers still want to eat the peppermints or chew the chewing gum or whatever it is.
Whatever.
So it's another one of those really weird butterfly wing effects that nobody thought when they put this rule in that you'd affect so many industries.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. But it's like, again, it's like the hydrocarbon thing. Nobody realizes how far it's spread the downstream products from hydrocarbons are and from oil refining. And if we stop doing that, all of those products disappear and our society collapses, basically.
Yeah. No, people have no idea how much plastics are a part of our life. You know, we're all wearing glasses. And I couldn't live without it's my worst nightmare, not being able to find my glasses. And yet, you know, they're all plastic. They're all made of plastic. You think,
well, and all the clothes we wear nowadays, you know, even if it's got some wool in it, often it's woven in with other synthetic fibers. You know, all the sort of gym gear that women wear nowadays has got lycra and stuff in it, you know, which again, it's oil derived. People just don't seem to realize it all.
Elastine in it, you know. So it's in
and the big one, of course, is ammonium nitrate, which is, you know, nitrogen fertilizer, which is made from methane. And half the world's population is dependent on it. So if you get rid of that, then half the people die. I struggle to see a worse outcome.
No, absolutely. Well, I don't know if you're the World Economic Forum, they look forward to a world where the population's 5% at the current level. And you know the elite are sort of tended to by this tiny minority of the servants they've allowed to continue living. It's quite a disturbing dystopian worldview, but they seem to be pushing it downwards, and politicians are swallowing it up. Yeah, very odd.
Yeah. So one for the I'm going to ask the final question, Brian. Yeah. So this one really is for our viewers. So what is the one action that they can take today to push back?
Your viewers can take today.
Yeah.
Oh.
Is there anything they can do to sort of raise this with other people or to push back in any way if it just sort of helps them out at home? Is there anything that they can do that would have immediate effect to them?
Well, I'm fortunate because my local MP is Matt Vickers, and I can go down to his house, bang on his door and say, here, Matt, have a look at this report and tell me if net zero is a good idea. And that's the thing we're going to have to do. We're going to have to harry our politicians and basically tell them, you are leading us down an economic and societal cul-de-sac, and we want you to turn around and reverse out of it. And if enough people start saying that, then it'll happen.
That's probably the best thing they can do.
Yeah. Which is one of the biggest problems that we have generally these days, is that we're fed one opinion and one opinion only, and we're told that is the truth. And so when anybody sort of rallies against the the message that we're being delivered, it's either ignored or it's you make it look like a crank. Well, they need to start listening.
Absolutely.
So it's papers like yours that we need to promote and get out into the mainstream.
Absolutely.
It's not just it is important, as you said at the start, Catherine. Your paper is aimed primarily at business, but what happens in business affects households, and and the fact that we're losing so many people, the brain drain, we're losing people that are going overseas to moving their businesses because, understandably, because of the energy costs over here. It's cheaper for them, and business brains will tell you, well, if I can cut costs, cutting costs is the same as making money, so I'm going to move abroad. So we need to do something, as David was saying, that there's no way, there's no reason to expect that we couldn't cut the costs of energy if we implemented some of the things that you two were talking about earlier. So it just needs education. Education is the big word in this one, really. It is getting it out to people that are, for whatever reason, no pun intended here, but flicking the off switch before you even are able to get the message over to them. Yeah. And the political will, of course, if you get enough people making this point to politicians, then it starts to change the direction of political travel, and
the view of politicians, because they've been driven by this net zero ideology, and it's an ideology because the science isn't supportable. So if you get enough people to say, hang on, this is just nonsense, we need to do something sensible and recover economic progress and economic prosperity, then that ultimately that wins votes.
Yeah, I would love to get the younger generation to start looking at the charts on Our World in Data, and just taking them to their local politician, because there's. I was giving a speech about 3 years ago on this, and a young man came up to me afterwards, and he was concerned about net zero and said, "But what if the world gets warmer?" And I said, well, actually, the UK would be much better off if it got a bit warmer. You'd grow more food, you'd use less money heating your home, you wouldn't need overcoats, everything would actually be better here if it was warmer. And he said, well, what about the people in India? And I had to say, well, the people in India are the ones who are burning all of the carbon at the moment. So I don't think they're worried, and when they start to worry, we should start to worry. But when China, Asia, India, China, and the rest of Asia producing 60% of the world's emissions right now, and they're not worried. So it's like, well,
the warming doesn't even work like that, Captain. Actually, the heat goes up towards the poles first. So the tropical temperatures haven't got much higher. They're much the same now as they were 50 years ago. But what has happened is that,
and weirdly, though, this whole thing started because islands in the tropics. Sorry, this whole thing started because of islands in the tropics complaining they'd be underwater. And I noticed the other day that the Chagos Islands, the average, the highest point I think is the average height is 4 feet above sea level. So that the whole thing is only, and it's been there for years, and the Americans have built a big base on it. And you think its average height above sea level is only 4 feet. It's like, well, what we started this whole thing to save these islands. They don't seem to be sinking. Shouldn't they be sunk by now? Why does Mauritius want to buy this place if it's going to sink? Why are we being fooled?
Yes, we are. Because the guy who went up to rolled his trousers up was a Gutierrez, I think, who went in the water and said all these islands are going to be, but that wasn't Chagos, it was one of the other Pacific groups. But actually they're building about 4 or 5 airports, which is a strange thing to do if you're expecting your whole island to be inundated. But they're looking at the tourist revenue, of course. More airports.
They're spending their sort of the climate reparations on building new airports.
Exactly. So that gives you a clue of where their real objectives lie. If you can get somebody else to fund your airports, then that's great, especially when you get more tourist revenue as well. It's a double whammy.
No, exactly. So
okay,
that's it. I think just take any information to your local MP about the number of job losses and the fact that the jobs are just moving to China and India.
Absolutely.
No one's,
Well, I think even the trade unions now are beginning to realise that this is a very bad trajectory that we're on.
I wish more of them did. I wish more of them did. Unfortunately, some of the big trade unions seem to be representing the sort of lanyard class of political, operatives and teachers and people like that who. And there are a lot of employees. One of the things from David's work is the productivity in a lot of these industries. It surprised me. I was reading about one of the refineries closing in Scotland, and they were talking about it being a percentage of the GDP of Scotland. I can't remember what it was like 4%.
Yes.
They employed about 400 people. Maybe it was 1,000 indirectly. And you're sort of going, how can you let something close? And then a politician would go, oh, well, there's only 400 votes in it. Why would I care? It's the other side of the equation,
It's, madness. So where are we in terms of the paper? Is it complete?
No, not even slightly. No. It's going through a lot of editing at the moment.
So when would you expect it to be ready?
I'm hoping that we'll get it out in April, but I'm just organising that with the people that will be publishing it. We're trying to get a nice date. There's a lot of other papers coming out, and we need to. There's one from the IEA next week, and so this has to come out at a time when people are willing to listen to it, and
And when it does come out, when it's published, for our viewers, will they be able to access it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It'll be on the internet, and it'll also be, obviously, we'll have hard copies.
And I'm sure Brian will agree that's something that we'll promote.
Yeah, we can send you guys hard copies.
Absolutely. That would be very useful. And we, maybe if you, and I know this is sort of kind of a Schadenfreude thing, but if you can time it when some large significant manufacturing site is threatened with closure, that would really ram the point home. I mean, it's sad to have to look at that as a business opportunity, but the point has to be made to the politicians that what they're doing is just mad, and linking the two things together, I think, just really hammers the point home.
I do know of at least one think tank that does keep its papers in a storage locker until the time is right.
It does all feel like just one massive virtue signaling exercise to me. So we need to.
It's a multi-billion-dollar virtue signaling exercise, because the estimates I've seen for the cost of net zero for this country alone vary between about 3 trillion from Net Zero Watch to 15 trillion, I think it was, from McKinsey. That's like $500 billion a year for 30 years, 15 trillion. And 3 trillion is about our GDP. So $500 billion a year is like about 1/6 of our GDP. That's a huge amount of money to be splattering down the drain effectively.
I think it's more than that, because you're counting the cost of imposing net zero onto companies. But there's a whole infrastructure where we've got a huge amount of consulting firms and advisory people have set themselves up to advise companies on how to do this. And that is actually a cost to the economy, because these people could be doing something more useful. And we've had, the last 10 years of university graduates are being sucked into this machine of selling net zero when they really should be joining an engineering firm or
doing something productive.
Chemicals are actually making something, and instead they're advising. They're working in consultancies, advising companies. So I think there's an unwritten opportunity cost of losing this talent into this.
Or certainly missing
and it's building
not mention the opportunity cost of the businesses that close as a result of net zero because of the energy thing. Because the energy costs, and that's more difficult to quantify. But I think it's probably even larger than the cost of spending the money on the wind farms and so on.
But I mean, even the World Bank says that the cost of adaptation is much smaller. It's sort of 170 trillion globally or something, and 15 trillion for the UK, that represents 1% of carbon dioxide emissions, man-made carbon dioxide emissions. It's crazy. It just doesn't stack up. It's not economically sensible. But we already established that quite a while ago.
Right. Well, it's been brilliant having you both on again, and absolutely. I think it'd be great when the paper's published, Brian. We'll go through it, and then if you would both like to come on again, we can discuss it and promote it and get it out there to the whole wide world and the country. I think it's very important that they see that. So thank you very much.
Send a copy to Chris Wright just to remind him that if you go down the UK route, this is what will happen to you.
I think we should send it to Mr. Miliband. But there you go.
Yes, absolutely.
That's brilliant. So thanks very much.
I think the UK is becoming the cautionary tale.
Yes, definitely.
For sure.
Cheers. So thanks so much, Catherine. Thanks, David, for coming on again, and we will love to have you back when the time's appropriate. So give us a shout, and we'll timetable it in.
Okay.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Great. Thanks
Thank
much
you.
indeed.
See you again.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.